The sound of shattering glass echoed through my mother-in-law's pristine kitchen. I froze, watching helplessly as her prized crystal gravy boat lay in pieces at my feet. The silence that followed was deafening. "Not again, Hannah." Patricia's voice dripped with contempt as she surveyed the damage. "That was my mother's crystal, irreplaceable, just like the serving dish you broke last month." I knelt to clean up the mess, my hands trembling. "I'm so sorry, I just proved once again that you don't belong in this kitchen," she finished, turning to address the growing audience of relatives gathering in the doorway, or in this family, for that matter. It was supposed to be a normal Thanksgiving. My husband, Mike, and I had arrived early to help with preparations, just like every year since we got married 3 years ago. And just like every year, his mother, Patricia, had found ways to remind me that I wasn't good enough for her precious son. "Mom, it was an accident," Mike called from the dining room, where he was setting the table. "We'll replace it." Patricia's perfectly manicured hand waved dismissively. "Oh, honey, some things can't be replaced, just like some skills can't be taught, apparently." I bit my lip, continuing to pick up the pieces of broken crystal. 3 years of snide comments, backhanded compliments, and not-so-subtle jabs about my cooking, my housekeeping, my career. You'd think I'd be used to it by now. But each barb still found its mark with surgical precision. The doorbell rang, announcing more arrivals. Soon the house was filled with the chaos of extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all carrying dishes and hugging and talking over each other. I stayed in the kitchen, trying to make myself useful without breaking anything else. "Anna, dear," Patricia's voice carried across the kitchen, sickeningly sweet. "Why don't you let Maria handle the turkey? We wouldn't want another incident like last year." Maria, my sister-in-law, smirked as she took over, her diamond rings flashing under the kitchen lights. Last year's incident had been a slightly overcooked turkey, not edible, just not up to Patricia's exacting standards. But the way they talked about it, you'd think I'd serve the family raw chicken. "I can help with something else," I offered, hating how small my voice sounded. "Perhaps the children's table needs setting," Patricia suggested, earning a laugh from Maria. "Though you might want to be careful with the plastic cups. Even those can be tricky." I caught Mike's eye across the room, silently pleading for support. He gave me an apologetic smile, but said nothing. We'd had this conversation countless times. He loved me, but his mother was set in her ways, and it was easier to just keep the peace. The afternoon wore on, and finally it was time to sit down for dinner. 20 people crowded around Patricia's extended dining table, admiring the spread. Despite my banishment from most of the preparation, I'd managed to contribute my grandmother's sweet potato casserole, the one dish I could make with my eyes closed. "Before we begin," Patricia announced, standing at the head of the table, "I have a small gift for my beloved daughter-in-law." My stomach dropped. Patricia's gifts were never actually gifts. They were always carefully crafted instruments of humiliation, like the beginner's cookbook she'd given me for Christmas or the world's okayest wife apron for my birthday. She pulled out a small wrapped package and handed it to me, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Open it, dear. I picked it out especially for you." With trembling fingers, I unwrapped the small box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a baby's pacifier. A bright pink one with the words "Quiet Please" printed on it. "Since you act like such a baby in the kitchen," Patricia announced to the now silent table, "I thought this might help keep you quiet while the adults cook." Laughter erupted around the table. Even Mike chuckled, though he had the grace to look embarrassed about it. I sat there, holding the pacifier, feeling my face burn as tears threatened to fall. But something inside me snapped. 3 years of humiliation. 3 years of trying to prove myself worthy of her precious son. 3 years of swallowing my pride and keeping the peace. Actually, I heard myself say, my voice steadier than I expected, "I have something to share too." I reached into my bag and pulled out an old leather-bound book, its pages yellow with age and stained with decades of cooking spills. Patricia's face went pale. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, all traces of humor gone from her voice. "Remember last month when you sent me to the attic to get the fall decorations?" I asked, running my hand over the worn cover. "I found this behind some old boxes, your grandmother's original cookbook." "That's private," Patricia snapped, reaching for the book, but I held it away. "Private? Like this inscription on the first page?" I opened the book carefully. "To my dearest Patricia, May these family recipes serve you well in your new marriage. Though remember, dear, they're not actually ours." The table had gone completely silent. Patricia's face had lost all color, and Maria had stopped mid-bite, her fork hovering in the air. "You see," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word, "I did some research. Every single secret family recipe that you've lorded over me for the past 3 years. They're all from a 1950s Good Housekeeping magazine. Your grandmother copied them word for word." Mike leaned forward. "Mom, is that true?" Patricia's hands were shaking now. "Anna, please." "Please what? Keep quiet about it? Like I've kept quiet about everything else?" I stood up, still holding the cookbook. "Maybe we should take a look at some of these treasured family recipes together." Patricia lunged across the table, her perfectly manicured hands grasping at air as I stepped back, keeping the cookbook safely out of reach. Cranberry sauce sloshed over the edges of its crystal bowl, staining the pristine white tablecloth, a sight that would normally send her into a frenzy. But right now, her eyes were fixed solely on the worn leather book in my hands. "Let's start with your famous honey-glazed carrots," I said, flipping through the yellowed pages. "The ones you claimed came from your great-great-grandmother in the old country." Page 47 of Good Housekeeping, December 1954. "Anna, that's enough." Patricia's voice had lost its usual sharp edge, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. But I wasn't finished, not after years of enduring her culinary tyranny. "Oh, and here's your secret dinner roll recipe, the one you refused to share with Maria until she'd been married for 5 years because she needed to prove herself worthy of the family traditions." I held up the magazine clipping that had been tucked between the pages, its edges brown with age. Maria's fork clattered onto her plate. "You told me that recipe was passed down through generations of our family's bakers. I particularly love this note in the margin." I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Remember to rewrite these in your own handwriting before sharing. Add your grandmother was quite thorough in her deception, wasn't she?" The silence around the table was absolute. Uncle George had stopped mid-chew, his mouth hanging open slightly. Cousin Beth was recording everything on her phone, though she tried to hide it behind a napkin. Even the kids had stopped fidgeting, sensing the weight of the moment. "Mom?" Mike's voice was quiet but clear. "Is this true? Are all your recipes just copied?" Patricia's face had gone from pale to mottled red. "You don't understand," she stammered, looking around the table desperately. "Times were different then. A woman's worth was measured by her cooking, yes," I interrupted. "You've only reminded me of that about 1,000 times. Like when you told everyone at my wedding that it was brave of Mike to marry someone who couldn't even make your grandmother's special meatloaf. The same meatloaf recipe that's right here, printed in the September 1955 issue." Maria had moved to her mother's side, but her eyes were fixed on the cookbook. "What about the Christmas cookies? The ones you make us swear never to share outside the family." I carefully turned to a dog-eared page near the back. "Betty Crocker, 1952. Though your grandmother did add extra vanilla extract. I guess that's something original, at least." Those magazines, Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. They were just inspiration. I improved upon them, made them my own. "Really?" I raised an eyebrow, turning the book so everyone could see. "Because these recipes are copied word for word, right down to the helpful hints at the bottom of each page." Aunt Susan, who'd been trying to get Patricia's sugar cookie recipe for 20 years, let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a snort. "Well, I'll be damned. You had no right," Patricia suddenly exploded, her composure finally shattering completely. "Going through my private things, exposing family secrets." "Family secrets?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Like how you've been secretly sabotaging my cooking for 3 years, moving the oven temperature when I'm not looking, adding extra salt to my dishes while they're resting." Mike's head snapped up. "What?" I nodded. "Oh yes, I caught that on my phone camera last Christmas. I started recording in the kitchen because I couldn't understand why my dishes always turned out wrong. But only at your house." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For the first time since I'd known her, she seemed completely at a loss for words. I kept quiet about it because I wanted to keep the peace. I continued, my voice softer now. "Just like I kept quiet about the snide comments, the constant criticism, The little gifts meant to humiliate me. But this, I held up the pacifier she'd given me earlier. This was the last straw. Mike stood up slowly, his face a mask of disbelief. Mom, you've been deliberately ruining Anna's cooking. All this time. Patricia reached for him. Honey, I was just trying to protect you. She's not good enough for. For what? Mike's voice had turned hard. For our family? Our precious cooking legacy that turns out to be nothing but magazine clippings. The air in the room had become thick with tension. Patricia looked around the table, seemingly realizing for the first time that she had lost her audience. Her carefully cultivated image of the family matriarch, keeper of treasured traditions, was crumbling before her eyes. I think, Mike said quietly, taking the pacifier from my hand, that this belongs to you, Mom, since you're the one acting like a child. The aftermath of that Thanksgiving dinner rippled through the family like aftershocks from an earthquake. Patricia fled to her bedroom in tears, while Maria frantically called after her, the reality of years of cooking-based manipulation finally sinking in. The extended family lingered awkwardly around the table, picking at their now-cold food and whispering among themselves. I sat there, the old cookbook still in my hands, feeling both vindicated and slightly guilty, not about exposing the truth that had been long overdue, but about ruining what was supposed to be a family celebration. Mike squeezed my hand under the table. You okay? I nodded, managing a small smile. Are you? Honestly, he sighed, running his free hand through his hair. I feel like an idiot. All these years watching her treat you like that, making excuses for her behavior. I should have stood up for you sooner. Aunt Susan cleared her throat, drawing our attention. Well, I for one am glad the truth's finally out. Though I have to ask, that sweet potato casserole you brought? Is that really your grandmother's recipe? I couldn't help but laugh. Yes, actually. Would you like me to share it? No 5-year waiting period required. That broke the tension. Soon, the dining room filled with chatter again as family members began sharing their own stories of Patricia's culinary gatekeeping. Uncle George admitted he'd always thought the meatloaf tasted exactly like his mother's, who'd sworn by Good Housekeeping recipes. Cousin Beth confessed she'd found the same dinner roll recipe in an old magazine at a dentist's office but had been too afraid to say anything. About an hour later, as people were preparing to leave, Patricia emerged from her room. Her makeup had been carefully reapplied, but her eyes were still red and puffy. She stood in the doorway, looking smaller somehow, less intimidating than she had earlier. Anna, she said softly, could we talk? Please? Mike started to protest, but I squeezed his hand. It's okay, I whispered. I need to do this. I followed Patricia into the kitchen, her domain, where she'd made me feel so inadequate for so long. She pulled out a chair at the breakfast nook, gesturing for me to sit. My grandmother, she began, her voice trembling slightly, wasn't a good cook. Not naturally anyway. She worked as a maid for a wealthy family, and they used to mock her attempts at cooking. She spent years collecting recipes, practicing in secret, determined to make sure her children would never feel that shame. She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. When I was young, she taught me everything she knew. Those magazine recipes, they became our family recipes because they were proven, reliable. They worked. And yes, we pretended they were handed down through generations because that's what good families had, traditions, heritage. But that's not what makes a family, I said gently. And it's certainly not what makes a good cook. Patricia nodded slowly. I know that now. Or I should have known it. When I saw how much Mike loved your cooking, how you weren't afraid to experiment, to create your own recipes, I got scared. Threatened. Everything I'd built my identity around seemed to be slipping away. So you tried to tear me down instead. Yes, she whispered. And I'm truly sorry, Anna, not just for today, but for everything. Every cruel word, every sabotaged dish, every moment I made you feel less than worthy. I sat there for a moment, letting her words sink in. 3 years of hurt couldn't be erased with one apology, but it was a start. I have an idea, I said finally. Why don't we create our own cookbook? A real family cookbook with everyone's recipes, your perfected versions of the classics, my experimental dishes, Maria's fusion creations. No more secrets, no more competition, just family sharing food they love. Patricia's eyes widened, then filled with tears again. But these seemed different from the earlier ones. You do that? After everything. On one condition, I said, pulling out my phone. I'm going to need your real recipe for those dinner rolls. The one with your actual measurements and modifications, not the magazine version. Because let's be honest, yours do taste better than the original. A genuine smile, the first I'd ever seen from her, spread across Patricia's face. The secret is browning the butter first, she confessed, and adding a pinch of cardamom. That Christmas, every family member received a beautiful hand-bound cookbook titled The Thompson Family Table. Real recipes, real stories, real love. Inside was a collection of recipes from everyone in the family, each accompanied by a personal story or memory. Patricia's recipes now proudly credited their origins while noting her own improvements. My experimental dishes sat alongside traditional favorites, and on the first page was a new inscription written in both Patricia's elegant script and my messier handwriting. To our family, may these recipes remind us that tradition isn't about perfection or pretense, but about the love we share through food. All are welcome at this table. The Pacifier? We bronzed it and turned it into a trophy for our new annual family cooking competition, awarded to the most innovative dish that completely breaks with tradition. Somehow, it seemed fitting.